Hello, everyone. Welcome to Muscular Dystrophy Warrior. I want to give a shout out to all my muscular dystrophy warriors worldwide. And also, I want to do a moment of silence for all the fallen warriors. And also, I want to give a shout out to all the non-disabled viewers. Welcome to my channel as well. My name is Alfonso Reyes. I'm 26 years old, living with muscular dystrophy Duchenne from Fresno, California, representing that 559. And also, before I forget, shout out to all the sports fans watching this video, especially the Niner fans like myself, Bang Bang Niner Gang, and also to all the fans that support the best team in the NBA, the LA Lakers. So shout out to Laker Nation. So for this video, which is going to be my first video on this channel, I previously had another channel where I talked about muscular dystrophy, just like this one. But when I created that channel, I was dealing with mental health issues. So I wasn't really giving it 100% or focus on the channel like I should. I also have a sports channel and a gaming channel. So those are doing good. I mean, they're still small channels, but they're doing good. Anyway, so my first video, I'm gonna be talking about my life story. It's gonna be titled "My Life Story: Living with Muscular Dystrophy," Part One, the very beginning. I'm still debating if it's gonna be a 3 or 4 part videos, but it depends how much I can talk about in each video. I don't want to make it that long, I don't want to, my viewers, whoever's watching this video, I don't want you guys to get bored, you know. So I hope you guys like my video. Hope you guys learn a little bit about my life story, living with muscular dystrophy and stuff like that. So stay tuned for the other parts, part two, part three, and maybe part four, depending. I'll probably will mention how many parts. If it's the last part of my videos, then obviously I'll move on to another thing, talking about muscular dystrophy, a different topic and stuff. So anyway, like I said, my name is Alfonso Reyes. I'm 26 years old, living with muscular dystrophy Duchenne from Fresno, California. I was born on August 26, 1999. But before I continue with how I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, I want to go back 5 or 6 years before the year August 26, 1999. My parents had another child before me, which was going to be a daughter. Her name was Alejandra. She passed away sadly after being born. The reason she passed away, I don't really know the name of the condition, disability, however you want to call it, why she passed away. She was missing the back of her skull, like the whole skull. You can see the skull, the brain. The only thing she had was the face. Her face was the only thing you can see because if you look at the back behind her face, you saw like the skull, the brain. She was missing that part of the skull, that covers obviously the skull and stuff. And you can see the brain and stuff. So if someone's born without that part of the skull, there's no way that person can survive without it. So she only lived for 4 seconds and passed away. My mom never got to see her because obviously when she went to labor, she was recovering from that. My dad is the one who saw her and stuff. My grandma, my mom's mom, saw her. My grandma from my dad's side, his mom saw her. My mom didn't see her, didn't get to hold her. She did not attend the funeral because when they did the funeral, she was still like recovering at the hospital to giving labor. She couldn't like obviously get up out of bed, and go the funeral. But my parents waited like 5 or 6 years before my mom got pregnant with me. So anyone who has, you know, had a son or daughter died during pregnancy, during labor or during pregnancy, I feel like would understand what goes through someone's mind when they lose a son or daughter, like my mom did. Because when you are going into labor, feel, as first time parents, I feel like it's a happy moment, feel of joy and happiness. That's how I feel like every, first time moms or any, it can be your second child, third child. I think you just go with the mindset of joy, happiness, everything happiness, joy, or any word that describes happiness. And when you leave the hospital, obviously that they give you a wheelchair, you have to leave the hospital in a wheelchair, even if you're not disabled. But imagine going, going to the hospital to give labor, and when you come out of the hospital in a wheelchair, you know, everyone is like happy to see, the son or child or daughter, holding the mom holding her in her hands, both hands. And imagine if you go into labor like my mom and come out in a wheelchair, like I said, the hospital rules and stuff, without your son or daughter. Imagine that moment. You're going to, like I say, into labor with joy, happiness, and then you come out, with a traumatized, harsh situation. Like I said, those that have experienced this, you know, will probably understand what goes through your mind, because really someone that hasn't experienced that can be like, can't relate as someone who has, you know. So that's why my mom waited 5 or 6 years to get pregnant with me. When she got pregnant with me, like every doctor appointment, she would always ask questions. Every ultrasound, like, is everything, well with with before she knew I was gonna be a son. Then when she knew, she's like, is everything good with my son? This and that. Asking questions, doing like she did the first time, taking care of herself, doing every recommendation the doctor gave her, eating healthy, doing everything, that your doctor instructs you to do, no drinking alcohol, like doing everything that she did the first time, following doctor's instructions and this and that. But sadly, the ultrasound can't not detect muscular dystrophy in that time. I don't know if it can now. I think it can. I've been reading stuff about like a process called screening, that they screen the son, the baby son or daughter, whatever gender it is. They screen it for to see if they have muscular dystrophy. But I don't know if they do it when the son or daughter's in the womb, with the ultrasound, or when they're like, born already. Um, I don't know how that works, but once I do a little bit of research and have the, right information, I'll probably make a video talking about that and stuff. So then I was born, August 26, 1999. Around 2 years old, my mom starts noticing a lot of worrying things and stuff. During that time, my parents lived with my aunt and uncle, my dad's sister and brother-in-law, and they had a son around my age. He's my cousin, 6 months older than me. His name is Omar. We're very close. We grew up together and stuff. So my mom noticed how my cousin Omar was always moving around. You know how an infant moves around when they're born, wiggling around this and that. And I wasn't doing that, I was like stiff, not moving, not wiggling around, and he was. Then when my mom fed me, I would always vomit the milk, and my cousin Omar wouldn't do that. And then that was two of the signs. I know maybe vomiting the milk wasn't the big one, while the other one, not wiggling around like every infant does. Then crawling, I wasn't crawling, I was dragging my behind, scooting my behind, and stuff. So that was another sign that's not normal, you know, and stuff. It took me longer to learn how to walk, and he was walking by 1 year old. He was already walking, and I was 2 years old and still not walking. So that was another sign of something going on with me. So my aunt told my mom, like, why don't you make an appointment with his primary care doctor, and see what's going on because this is not normal, and this and that. So my mom takes my aunt's advice, calls that day and schedules an appointment with my primary care doctor and stuff. And we go to the appointment. My mom explains to the doctor what's going on and stuff. I thought I was gonna sneeze. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, so my mom tells the doctor what's going on and stuff, and then obviously the doctor, decides after my mom explains the symptoms and what's going on, my doctor decides to um, send me to a genetics doctor. He refers me to the genetics doctor who's going to be running more tests, because he's a genetics doctor. He runs everything that has to do with genetics, DNA and all that stuff. So he does a few blood tests, nothing suspicious in the blood test. So he starts, he had a feeling there was some sort of muscular dystrophy. So he was like, let's do a biopsy so we can see better. So a biopsy, I know most of you probably know what it is. They take a piece of your muscle. It doesn't matter. I don't know what part of the bodies you can do a biopsy in, but mine, they did it in my right leg. I still have a scar. It was a little bigger, but now it's like as I obviously been getting older, I'm 26 years old. Uh, it's getting smaller, as I've been growing. I mean, it's still visible, but not that visible, you know. So there's that, and it was like playing roulette. I say that playing roulette because there's so many categories of muscular dystrophy. It's like playing roulette at the casino. You'll be like, where do you think the ball is gonna land? That's for example, black 24, red 23, and stuff. That's how it was with me. Like, which category will I land with muscular dystrophy? My doctor was hopeful that I landed on the least severe one, which was muscular dystrophy, Becker muscular dystrophy, BMD for short. But sadly, I landed on the most, on the worst one, the deadliest one, the one that progresses faster than the other one, and stuff, which is muscular dystrophy Duchenne. I mentioned living with muscular dystrophy Duchenne at the beginning of the video. So yeah, I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy Duchenne at 2 years old, DMD for short. So yeah, we went to the genetic doctor, I think until I was 5 years old. And there's a memory around that time that I was seeing a genetics doctor. Uh, that still has stuck with me like forever. One of the appointments, my doctor, the genetics doctor, he started drawing things on the whiteboard. They had a whiteboard in the room where I was, obviously the appointment was going to be at. And he was drawing like circles and other stuff and explaining to my parents why this happened and stuff. But when you're a kid, you see somebody drawing the whiteboard. I thought they were like drawings. Obviously, once I became a teenager, obviously, I learned, this in biology. Was what he was doing was some basic biology, explaining about the egg, the sperm, how, and then telling my mom that she was a carrier of the disability and stuff. So how the egg and the sperm, obviously egg and the sperm had to make a connection. It's like a plug and an outlet. You connect your plug to the outlet, can be a light bulb, lamp, fan, heater, whatever. Once you connect it's gonna turn on, right? So that's how it worked with muscular dystrophy. My mom being the carrier, but my mom doesn't have to be the carrier. The dad has to be a carrier. I don't know what terminology they use to this to say that the dad is a carrier, but let's just say carrier. They're both carriers. So the sperm already is carrying, the muscular dystrophy, and so is the egg. So once they make a connection, it becomes a 50-50 chance. It's like making a coin toss, like in football, it can either land in heads or tails, but I mean, it's 50-50, it can land on heads or it can tail. So that's how it is with muscular dystrophy. Even though the sperm and the egg connect, it becomes a 50-50 chance, 50% that the child is going to be born with muscular dystrophy, 50% chance it won't be born. So it's like you don't know what can happen in that aspect. But as I'm talking about muscular dystrophy, here's a fact about muscular dystrophy. It affects boys more than girls. It affects men more than women and stuff. It's a few cases that, a daughter is born with muscular dystrophy. It's mostly a son who's born with muscular dystrophy. But like I said, it's a 50-50 chance. It's not like, oh, the mom is a carrier and the dad is a carrier. Oh, he's going to be born with muscular dystrophy. No, it's like a 50-50 chance, 50% that it will have it and 50% that it won't. So my genetics doctor talked about a procedure to my parents. The procedure would involve, like, I don't know what the procedure they would do to my mom. If they did that procedure was for if they were planning to have more kids and stuff. And so they told my mom that it was like $1,000 for that procedure. Supposedly it would tell her that doctors would see like what gender was gonna be the next son or daughter, was it gonna be a son or a daughter, And if it was a son, will he be carrying muscular dystrophy? Or if it was a daughter, would she be one of those rare cases that have muscular dystrophy, But the son is born with muscular dystrophy, like I said. The daughter sometimes will be born, she'll be a carrier. Like for example, if my mom would have had me and my sister, Alejandra, maybe when she had kids, she would be diagnosed as a carrier, But being a carrier, there's no way to detect that until they run some tests, and the son is born with muscular dystrophy and stuff. So even if you're even like there's a lot of people that have siblings, There's one sibling that has muscular dystrophy and everyone else doesn't. So they can be carriers, when they have their own kids, but you can't know. I think they do tests on your siblings. I don't know how that works either. Or I don't know if that exists, to see if they're carriers or not. But my parents' idea was always about just having one son or one daughter. It didn't matter what it was, a son or a daughter. They had the daughter first before they had me. But like I said, the daughter passed away, my sister passed away, and then they had me 5 or 6 years later, they had me, which I would say I was born with this disability called muscular dystrophy Duchenne, So yeah, their decision wasn't affected by me being born with muscular dystrophy. They have always told me that it wasn't, because of me, it was like that was their idea all along, It wasn't like, oh, he's born with muscular dystrophy. Well, let's not have another child. No, my dad always wanted one son and one daughter, you know. So like, yeah, now I'm gonna move on to the other part of the video that I want to talk about. How have my parents handled the situation all these years? Well, my mom at first, it was very hard to hear that her only son, yeah, like I'm the only son, I already explained that. My parents already wanted to have one kid. So imagine my mom was like her only son, is born with this neuromuscular disease, and she felt like, why me? Was I a bad person? Did I do something wrong? What did I do to deserve this? I feel like that's a normal thought. Every parent who have had, someone with muscular dystrophy or any sort of disability, why me? It's like there's a lot of things that go through your mind, but the way I see it's like, why not me? We're all humans, in this crazy world. We all can hit rock bottom, either financially, being diagnosed with a disability, marriage problems, any type of problem we all can go through. Like I said, we're all humans. We're all in this crazy world, anybody can deal with a disability. You might be healthy right now, but a few years later, you can be diagnosed with cancer. There's so many types of cancers, Sadly, there's so many types of disabilities. Sometimes you can have a car accident or an accident that leaves you in a wheelchair, and it's not that you're a bad person. It's like, I don't know, I can't really explain the reason, but everything happens for a reason. So I'm like, yeah, it can feel like that, but now that I get older, it's like, why not you? We're all exposed to this crazy world, of a lot of diseases, accidents we can have, but it can be hard at first to accept that reality, but she has accepted it more better than my dad. With my dad, it's been honestly, it was harder at first at the beginning of the whole diagnosis and stuff, but slowly he has accepted it, not like 100%, but he's has accepted it a little bit. I mean, he really doesn't. I mean, yeah, he's there with me. He's always been here with me for my 26 years of life, but he rarely wants to know anything the doctor says. I mean, if my mom wants to tell him like, oh, they said this, the doctor told me this, he really doesn't want to be involved or not involved, but I'll say hear it. What the doctor said, all he says is like, doesn't want to hear that. All he knows is that I'm alive, I'm there, gaming or doing something in my room. He knows that I'm there, So he doesn't, I wouldn't say gets involved, but I mean, he helped me like get used to restrooms, transfer me from my chair to my bed, this and that. But when it comes like what the doctor says, he doesn't really want to hear that stuff. So it's been kind of hard for him, like since the beginning, but he slowly has accepted it, but not like 100%, but he has accepted it a little bit. But my mom is the one who has accepted it a little bit better than he has. I mean, I mentioned this in this video because the family dynamic is destroyed with muscular dystrophy. I don't know what's the divorce rate when a son is born with muscular dystrophy, but I feel like it's a high one. Sometimes the dad leaves because he can't deal with that situation and stuff, or sometimes the mom leaves because one of them is gonna leave at, it's higher divorce rate. So one of the parents is gonna leave, either the mom or the dad. So it's a very complicated, situation. Like I said, the family dynamic is destroyed, especially if you have siblings, and stuff like that. But like I said, luckily my parents have been with me for all 26 years of my life and stuff, but not everybody's fortunate enough, But the next part I'm moving on is about my childhood. I want to talk about my childhood. I feel like that's an important part of everyone's life story, their childhood, the good, the bad. But for me, I don't have any bad memories, I say. My childhood was always great. There's not like something I regret during childhood and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll say my childhood was great. despite having muscular dystrophy Duchenne, I was still like have a normal childhood. I would say I was able to ride a bike, throw a ball, kick a ball. The only issues I had was I couldn't run like the rest of the kids, my age, I couldn't run. If somebody would give me a small push, I would fall easily, or I would fall easily by myself, lose my balance and fall. I scraped my knees, my elbows several times, especially my knees, because I would lose balance by myself and fall and stuff. But that didn't stop me from having a great childhood. I went trick or treating like every other kid. I went to my local fair here. I would go on rides and stuff. So yeah, my childhood was great. When it came with the bike, there was something kids were doing back in those days. I forgot what was the reason for it. If I remember, I'll probably leave it on the comment section below, so you guys can read it. They would put like an empty plastic bottle behind the back wheel of the bike, and they would like pedal with, obviously get on the bike, pedal the bike with that bottle behind the back wheel. I don't remember what was the reason or what were kids doing. I don't know if everyone was doing it. Those that were, born in 1999, do you guys remember that? Or it was just, because we live in an apartment complex, so there was a lot of kids that I knew, and stuff that would ride their bike like myself during the afternoons and stuff. Don't remember. So yeah, childhood was great. I have a couple of childhood memories that I would like to share. Like one of them is when I was around 5 years old. One of my favorite movies growing up was Space Jam. You know, Michael Jordan, the Looney Tunes were playing basketball with Michael Jordan. And yes, my fellow LeBron fans, I prefer Space Jam, the original one, not part two with LeBron. I'm sorry, LeBron fans. I have a friend that's a huge LeBron fan. Sorry, bro. But I'm always gonna say Jordan is better than LeBron. Sorry, my LeBron fans. No hate for LeBron. Respect the man. Everything he has accomplished, respect him and stuff. Going from nothing to being a superstar. Respect that, you know. But anyway, yeah, Space Jam was one of my favorite movies growing up. I mean, most of you guys who seen that movie, was were already, kids in the 90s, probably watched this movie and remember this scene. Remember when it's almost like the end of the movie when they're Looney Tunes and Michael Jordan are losing the game, and they have the ball, the last play of the game, they're talking about what they're gonna do, this and that, and then during the play, they decide what they're gonna do. Then, during the play, they obviously do the play, they grew up. Then Michael Jordan, instead of passing, he takes off and obviously jumps, and flies in the air, trying to reach the basket. And remember the monsters, uh, grab his legs, and trying to bring him down to the floor. So time expires, he doesn't make the basket. But since, he's in like for who tells him that he's in Looney Tune Land. Basically, he can stretch, his hand as far as he can. So remember, he stretches his hands as far as he can to get to the basket. He drops the basket, before the clock expires. And he makes the basket, and they win. So watching that scene, I always thought the shoes, wearing Jordan shoes made you fly. Obviously, nowadays, I know the shoes don't make you fly. Does it make you fly like Mike? Yes, I know. But you know how when you are a kid, you have a lot of things, imagination. I had a cousin named Manuel. He's older than me. and stuff, he would always say that babies came from bonds, that his parents bought him at bonds and stuff. I think Bonds was Seymour, one of those stores. I'm like, bro, see, kids, we always say a lot of things. He used to say that the kids were bought at bonds. Now he has his own kids. Obviously, he knows. I mean, obviously, he knows what's the process. I mean, I was like, we should tell him, like, remember when you used to say that kids were, bought at bonds? Like, if they were like some kind of grocery thing they sold at bonds, imagine 2 for 1. Imagine that. But yeah, he used to think that, and for me, it was more like thinking that I was Michael Jordan, flying with those Jordan shoes. Since I can remember, my parents have always bought me Jordan shoes. Obviously, I buy my shoes once in a while, but my foot's not. I can't. It's harder for me to buy shoes because nowadays, because like my foot is not like it's turning. It's not like properly due to muscular dystrophy, your feet is gonna turn and makes it harder to use a shoe at some point. So nowadays I'm like I still like shoes. I mean I sometimes I'll choose that as a gift, for someone, either a family member or whoever, like birthday gift. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, let's give him a pair of shoes. I picked the shoes because I know obviously I like shoes. I'm a sneakerhead to be honest and stuff. So yeah, I used to think, like I said, I used to think Michael Jordan shoes, Air Jordan, the Jordan shoes, made you fly. Like I said, obviously it doesn't. Would be nice if it did, like all the NBA players would be able to dunk, not just a certain few. You know what I mean? But leave down on your guys's. Feel free to leave a comment down below. What are your guys' favorite Jordans? I would like to hear, the Jordan 1, 2, which are your Jordan? And also, do you feel like back in the day Jordans were better than now? Because I feel like the material they make the shoe is very sensitive. I feel like it doesn't last longer like it used to. Or is it me that I'm getting old, and I feel like back in the day was better? Gonna leave a comment down below, my fellow sneakerheads and stuff. So yeah, that's one of my childhood memories. The other one is, despite being an only child, like I mentioned earlier in the video, there was a time period with my dad and mom lived with my aunt and uncle. And I grew up with my cousin Omar. Then a few years down the road, my aunt had another child, a daughter. Her name is Lisbeth. She's much younger than me and Omar. Omar is older for 6 months, like I mentioned, than me. But we grew up together. We did sleepovers, all that fun stuff. Even if I was an only child, they were like my brother and sister. Like the brother and sister I never had because we always played together, hide and seek, tag, baseball, kickball, tetherball. My cousin bought the tetherball, the ball, and then he obviously, I think he had a pipe. He got like one of those pipes and put it like on the ground, and he just tied the tetherball because they do sell the tetherball, but you just have to have the pipe. I call it pipe that has where you tie the tetherball and stuff. So he had to buy it separately and stuff like that. So yeah, despite being an only child, I had somebody to hang out with and to play with. My cousin Elizabeth would always complain to my parents about why don't they have a daughter, because she wanted someone to play with. Obviously, I would go with Omar, and me and him would do play with stuff boys play. Obviously, it's a girl. She wanted to play, obviously, girl stuff. Obviously, we were not gonna play that stuff, honestly, and stuff. So she would always tell me why don't they have a daughter because she doesn't have someone to play with, obviously. But yeah, great times, good times, good times. Then I'm moving on to the family support. I felt like I needed to really talk about family support. Honestly, my family doesn't really know the diagnosis. They never really been involved about the diagnosis. Some know that you obviously have a disability that's progressive and affects your muscle, but they don't really know the daily challenges, you know. I don't receive like a text message or a phone call, you know, saying, oh, how, or not me, not to me. Like when I was younger, yeah, I get it. Not to me. Maybe they wouldn't call me because I didn't have a phone. Now that I do, you know, they can text, like, how am I doing? Or if I don't answer, they can always reach out to my mom or dad and stuff like that. But they, obviously, I mean, I get it. I understand. Like everybody has a life, you know. When you don't have a disability, everyone has a life, their kids, their problems. Everybody has problems in life. Some can be small, some can be big. You know, I understand that, or they're busy with work. I get it. Like everybody works. I mean, I don't, but you know, you get what I mean. So, I mean, I get it. Like they're not really involved, you know, with when it comes to me and my disability, you know. And the funny thing sometimes like there's a lot of ish problem with a lot of family members. I mean, I like to say we're divided. Not everybody gets along with everyone and stuff, but you know, there's a lot of jealousy, hatred between all family members, but they forget. I mean, with me at home, we don't have any hatred or jealousy towards anyone. Honestly, it's always towards us or any other, but I'm like, it's always about like who has more. Oh, I have this, I have two houses. Just an example. I have a new car, this, and it's always about what I have. You know, I have this, I have that, but it's like you forget the bigger picture, you know. Without health, you wouldn't have that stuff, you know. And there's a lot of things to be grateful for, but they're more focused on the material things than obviously being happy that they have healthy kids. You know, they have kids that are good kids. You know, you're more focused on the material than focus on what you have, you know, which a good, you have a family, you have somewhere to live, you have food on the table, but they prefer to focus on more about what I have material wise than, you know, your family and stuff. But the lack of family support hasn't affected me because I have found support in other people that are not related to me. I feel like everybody can relate to this. Sometimes you find support with people that are not related to you and stuff. So that part of life hasn't affected me at all, to be honest, and stuff. Now I'm going to talk about my elementary school years. School was great, you know, always made good friends, always had good teachers and stuff. So there's no complaint there. Was I a bully or had issue with other students? I wouldn't say I was bullied, but I'll prefer to, for me, it's more like, you know, issues with other students than bullying. For me, bullying is something that, you know, it's constant. Not every one day you bother, one day you bully someone, then the other day you don't. So I had an issue with a student around third grade and stuff. I was using the restroom. During that time, I didn't use a wheelchair. I was still able to walk and stuff. I'll talk about when did I stop walking in this video, you know, a little later in the video. But anyway, I was using the restroom. I still remember using number one, and one of my classmates decided to kick me from behind, you know, just went and kicked me. And obviously, I told the teacher and this and that. Obviously, she took us outside the same day, or I think the following day and stuff. She took us outside, you know, he apologized, and he was basically just horsing around, you know, and stuff. He apologized that that wasn't gonna happen again, you know, that he was just horsing around this and that. And the funny part is, we became good friends after that and stuff. His name was Matthew. We went to third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. Obviously, I was in third grade. Yeah. Yeah, I think I was in third, he was gonna be going to fourth. When I was in fourth, he was in fifth. When I was in fifth, he was in sixth. So obviously during my fifth grade, sixth grade, he was gonna be going to middle school and stuff. So during that time, I ended up moving to a different school. He was going to a different school the following year anyway. He was gonna go to middle school, and I was gonna go to sixth grade. But I moved schools because first we lived in an apartment building where I used to ride my bike, like I said. It had stairs, our apartment building was upstairs and stuff, and things were getting harder for me to get upstairs, and stuff. So then an aunt that I have told us to move in with her since she only lived with with her daughter, that's it, and stuff like that. So we moved there. We were there a couple of years until we were able to get a house. That we lived more than 10 years there. So yeah, so I ended up moving. Obviously, it would be nice to reconnect with a lot of classmates from my elementary school years and stuff. I feel like I only have contact with two of my classmates and stuff. But probably that was because I met them in sixth grade and stuff, you know. So yeah, so I ended up moving to a different school, and I had issue with three students at the new school. There was basically a lot of problems during sixth grade, not with just students. I'll explain what other stuff, but yeah, I had an issue with three students. Their names were David, Aaron, and I think Michael. Well, it was mostly David, 'cause Aaron and Michael were just spectators. David was the one, I forgot what issues we had. One time we were obviously lined up, to get our lunch straight and stuff, and he decided he spit behind me. So basically I told the teacher, but during sixth grade, like half of sixth grade, I had a substitute teacher because the main teacher had surgery, the teacher that was going to be my teacher, which was going to be Miss Hollis, and the substitute name was Mr. Hernandez. So I told Mr. Hernandez, David did this and that. He obviously took us outside, and told him why did he spit. Obviously, David was one of those students, you know, that didn't follow the rules. Obviously, he denied it. We were there for a couple of minutes because he kept saying, I didn't do this and that. He just kept yelling that I didn't do this and that. But he apologized. He was like, sorry, like real quick, not like a proper apology. Like, whatever, dude. Then another time he was complaining that he supposedly in the mornings where he would go to breakfast, I would eat breakfast at home because the bus picked me up and stuff like that. The first student bus, the famous yellow bus and stuff. So he would go to breakfast in the morning, walk from home to school, I think. And since he didn't finish the breakfast, he took one of those. I forgot what the sandwich name is. Like you see it, you buy it at the store. It's like a jelly, peanut butter jelly sandwich, that you put in the freezer. I forgot the brand's name and stuff. So he said that I took it. I'm like, bro, I did not take your breakfast, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He kept complaining that I did. I'm like, no, I didn't. Why would I? I don't even like that. He was like, don't lie, this and that. I'm like, bro, I did not take it. You've been sitting, I was like, you've been sitting on your desk. I mean, we sit together. I know I sit on my desk and I know I sit behind you. You sit in front of me. Like, you've been sitting there like for the last few hours, that we went in the classroom. Like, bro, how am I gonna steal and this and that until he found us? See, I'm like, see, I told you, bro, you're the one who put it somewhere you couldn't find it. I mean, he didn't say nothing after that. He We had to obviously stood quiet because I mean there's nothing to argue there. Then one of them moved, Michael moved to Madeira, so it was just Aaron and David, which they were good friends. But Aaron was mostly, like I said, a spectator. He was just there. He never did anything that I recall. Then when Miss Hollis came back, there was an incident that I had. Uh, Sometimes I did fall at school, like I said, that I would lose my balance. It was never because a student pushed me or stuff. But yeah, sometimes I did fell in elementary school, scraped my leg a little bit, and this and that. But it wasn't nothing serious. But this incident wasn't about me falling. One day I went to use the restroom, number two. Obviously, I sat at the toilet seat, you know, and I wasn't able to get up at some point, and there was nobody there until you know how they have people like making sure there's nobody in the restroom, not security. And I told them that, I told them what class I was in, if they can call the assistant or and stuff like that. So they did. They called the assistant. I told Mr. Hernandez what was going on. They called the assistant. And when they called the assistant, David was gonna use the restroom as well. So I told him what was going on, and the teacher was like, obviously David's a guy, so he's like, can you go like unlock the door? So obviously he had to go under the door to get into the obviously where I was. Obviously he took he unlocked it in the no he first he unlocked it and he also gave me paper, toilet paper because the restroom was empty. No, he just obviously he handed it quick and then obviously I unlocked the door. The assistant let me do my business, and this and that. Then the assistant, she helped me get up and then obviously just close the door so I can, like finish my business, this and that. So obviously I didn't tell my mom this incident because she would be worried. She was always worried that I would fall at school and this and that. And so even though I had differences with David, like one time I tripped and fell, I lost my balance and fell in the classroom. And he was there, so he lent me a hand. So that's why I'm like, don't you think if it's bullying, like my fellow viewer who been bullied, don't you think if it was bullying, why would you help someone? And about the restroom incident, he never really bullied me about that. Like, don't you think? I mean, I don't know. I feel like sometimes now that I think about it, I feel like he probably was going through personal stuff at home, and stuff like that. I don't know what things he was going through. Sometimes people act like that because they go through a lot, you know, and sometimes acting bad and this and that, makes you hide, what you really, your thoughts, everything you're going through, and stuff. So that was an issue with the restroom and stuff. And so one time, 'cause, they called my mom because they noticed I wasn't really using the restroom like I should. Like I would go, but I didn't go like I was going. And obviously, Mr. Hernandez and his staff got worried. Why isn't he using the restroom and stuff? And so one time, my mom went to pick me up. I forgot the reason she picked me up. And she talked with the teachers, and they told her what was going on and stuff. So there was an issue with that. And they were gonna figure out how they can assist me. So Mr. Hernandez was like, I can assist them. Because they didn't have an aide like they did in high school. I'll explain that in the next video. In middle school, I had an aide who helped me use the restroom, and there they didn't have any aides to help me. So Mr. Hernandez was like, I can help him. Like, he would go into the restroom, I would go into the restroom, do my business. Then when I was done doing my business, he would come then walk out and let me finish my business, nothing inappropriate, just did that job in and out, nothing inappropriate, how sometimes things happen, teacher take advantage of students, so that wasn't the case. It was like do the job that he had to do, and that's it, and stuff. So I would only use it during recess, and stuff like that. Then Mr. Hernandez obviously left because Miss Hollis was coming back. That's when the issues with the restroom came because they were like, we don't really have someone to assist them because the assistant was supposed to be injured herself. So something with her back, she injured something with her back. So she didn't want to risk getting re-injured, assisting me, and stuff like that. So here comes where I have to switch gears here. Now I'm gonna talk about my therapist, Steve. Like since I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, I have always seen a neurologist, pulmonologist, cardiologist, physical, occupational therapy. I've seen all that stuff, like for since I can remember. What always I had one therapist that she lasted for like so many years, and stuff. Her name was Carrie. She was my physical, I think. And yeah, my physical therapy, she lasted, for a while. Then obviously I would always see the therapist that I'm gonna talk about, Steve. I would always see him with other patients. He always seemed like that he was like one of those angry people. He looked like that. But once Carrie left, they assigned me Steve as my physical therapist. So I was like, how will this go? You know what I mean? Because I kind of seen him, and obviously he was a great therapist. Always telling joke. He made therapy session entertaining, not boring and stuff. So when I started seeing Steve, I was with Miss Hollis. So there was issue with the restroom. Then they figured it out, the nurse is gonna help you. First they said the nurse was gonna help me. And then they were like, no, they obviously couldn't because, there's students that go to the nurse, then they need the nurse to see what's going on with them. So they're not, so the principal of that elementary school, Mr. Grivis, went out of his way. He's like, I could assist him, same like Mr. Hernandez. He did what he had to do, let me do my business and then obviously help me get up from the toilet seat. And again, he would walk out and let me, do my business, finish my business, and stuff. So so it seemed like we already figured out a solution and stuff. Then at some point, it was harder for me to walk and be standing, and I had a manual wheelchair, that my physical therapist had already gave me. So I would take it from, obviously we left it at school because I was still taking the first student bus with other students who obviously wasn't the handicap version. It was where you walked and stuff. And before all this happened, like during English, when it was English class, I would always go to a different classroom before I forget to mention this and stuff. I would go with other students that were obviously non-disabled. They didn't have some sort of disability. They would always, since I'm talking about the bus, the first student bus, the famous yellow bus and stuff, they would always ask because they would go on the longer one. They would ask why did I go on that bus if every student that went on that bus was obviously had autism or some sort of disability like that, and I didn't. So, I didn't know how to answer that question back in that day. It was like, it's still the same bus, only because I don't went at the bus stop like you guys do. And there was another student that every time I would leave the classroom, he would go to his class and always be like, because when you have muscular dystrophy, you walk differently from every other student that doesn't have a disability like yours, he would always ask, why did I walk differently? Obviously, I didn't know how to explain it to him because I felt like even if you explain it to people, sometimes they won't really understand. And during that time, I felt like I didn't have a proper answer, for all those questions. Why did I use the other bus? Why do I walk like this? I didn't have, it wasn't bullying. He was just asking, but I felt like I didn't really have like the proper answer, to those questions. Now I can, I'm making this video, talking about it, and stuff like that. So yeah, that was an issue. There was a lot of things that happened at that school during sixth grade and stuff. And then there was the issue. And then we moved to a different classroom so I can be closer to the restroom, the nurse's restroom. That's where I would use the restroom, not the regular restroom. So we moved to that classroom. Then obviously, like I said, I wasn't able, it was being harder for me to walk, like I said, or be standing, and stuff. So yeah, it was hard. So I took my own wheelchair and leave it there. And then at some point, I needed a wheelchair full time, you know, and the teacher didn't want to push me, so they gave me another wheelchair, instead of using the they gave me like the manual wheelchair. They pushed me for maybe 1 or 2 days, and then they were making me push myself. Obviously, I told them, I can't push, and they still made me push. So I and my mom went to the school and I told her what was going on. She went and they were like, no, we're not making him push, We gave him this wheelchair because we don't have nobody to push. And this wheelchair is better than what he has, I think something like that. And they were like, kept asking, do I have an electric wheelchair? And I was like, no, I always deny it. But when I got Steve as a therapist, every therapy session was a lesson for me to learn how to use a wheelchair and stuff. It was before, I think it was around fifth or sixth grade that I got Steve, you know. But I remember it was more sixth grade that I saw him more. So he was like, they started teaching me how to use an electric wheelchair. He felt that, it was best to have it because he was like, at some point you're gonna stop walking and use the electric wheelchair. So I prefer you to have it learn how to use it. And then when the time comes, you already know how to use it. So every lesson, every therapy session was like a new lesson, how to do this, how to, like different obstacles, he would put how to maneuver the wheelchair or how to go up a ramp, how to park in a bus, how to park in your handicap and if you had one, he was like, and then he, like I said, he would make it fun, he wouldn't make it boring. He was like when he explained the rules, oh man, he made it fun, entertaining. He was like, I know you don't have brother. He's like, I know you're an only child, but don't, it's not a toy. He was like, it's not a toy. Nobody needs to touch the joystick, not even little nephew or little cousins, And also, no, like they cannot sit on the wheelchair and drive the wheelchair around because, like I said, it's not a toy and stuff. He was like, no running over people because he was like, I have a lot of patients that they're older than you. They go to high school, college, and they're just running over people on purpose. And the school, the administration have had to contact me and be like, hey, are you Steve? They're so and so therapist. He's like, yeah, your patient is running over people, doing this and that, causing havoc here at school. And obviously, we want to know if you can suspend him with the wheelchair. And he's like, I have to take it away. I was like, obviously, I don't leave him without a wheelchair. It was like, obviously, they get a manual chair as punishment, which is no fun, instead of being independent with your electric wheelchair. So no running over people, no going off road, no going fast, in public places, which and then he would always joke around. Obviously, in that time period, I didn't really care. Obviously, I was 9 or 10, yeah, or 11, I didn't really care about the opposite sex, the opposite, which is girls, I didn't really women, girls, whatever you want to call it. Now that I'm older, I didn't really care for that. So, I mean, now it's different. Obviously, I'm 26 years old. It's different now than when you're a kid, and stuff like he would always know giving rights to girls who want to get rights. I'm like, I started laughing because I'm like, obviously, I was 10 or 11. Obviously, I wasn't a teenager. I didn't really care for that, you know. But I feel like the only rules I've broken, I'm always speeding. Yes, I'm always going fast everywhere. I don't slow down. I always have my chair full speed. I hate going slow. I've been off road. I haven't run over anybody on purpose. If I crash into you, it's by accident. I always, try to stop, make an emergency brake. I mean, I know the chair does not have an emergency brake, but I always make sure to stop. And if the person crashes, he won't get run over. He'll just crash into me and stuff. So back to the school issue. So I had a power chair, like I said already, and I would have denied it, but I don't know how they found out that I did. Because I think they found out that I did because they called Steve and he told them. Then he called us to schedule an appointment because he wanted to see me because he wanted to know what was going on. And I told him this and that. He was like, oh, like he didn't, I apologize for, telling them that I haven't, but I told him like it's been a hassle with that school, this, and he was like, oh, no, no, no worry, man. Like, I understand. And I was going to have an IEP during that time. I was like, Steve, can you come to my IEP and explain to them that, I need assistance? Obviously, I need somebody to push me in the other wheelchair, or what are we gonna, do with all this? He was like, yeah, let me know when, and I'll check my schedule. And he checked, he got his phone. He's like, let me see what things I have to do. You're not at home, but he's like, I should be able to come there during that day. And before the IEP, we had a field trip to the Fresno Fair and stuff. Yeah, to the Fresno Fair. And obviously they got another bus, a wheelchair bus, because I was in when school started, I was the only person, who was going to be using a wheelchair a few months after, sixth grade started. Then my girlfriend Lupita, moved to that school, and that's where, I met her and we became good friends, from sixth grade. And she obviously was in a wheelchair. So obviously during the fair they already had to get a handicap bus because I was going, she was going. And we asked the driver because that was when I was starting to use the wheelchair and it was harder for me to get on the regular bus and stuff, the regular first student bus and stuff. So I told him what I need to do to switch. He's like, you have to sign some paperwork and this and that, which we did that. So obviously I ended up switching buses to the handicap bus. And I didn't just meet Lupita, I met another friend named Nude. So obviously it was nice to have two friends because the other students, like I said, I had issues with. So his name was New, he was Asian. Uh, he was a good drawer. Like anything you told him to draw, he would draw it just exactly like the picture. I have a Kobe poster right here. I could, if I took a picture and send it to him, like, hey, can you draw me this? And he will basically draw it exactly like how the poster looks, and stuff. So yeah, I made two friends. Sadly, knew I had to move to Clovis. Right now he's living in Minnesota, but I still keep in touch with both of my friends and stuff. So elementary school during sixth grade wasn't all bad. Then after, like I mentioned, the students I had issue with, and then other students that at the beginning of the year I didn't have issue with. Their name were Winnie Yap. I know what a horrible name to have. Yeah, I know. Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, that was his name, not Winnie the Pooh, but the first one. Then we had another student named Mikhail. Didn't listen. I don't know. He always had to take medication to not act up. So I don't know what his disability is, but he smelled like poops. I mean, I'm not lying, guys. This is true. You know, you can smell it. And sometimes David would mess with him or have issue because they known each other since I think third grade. Yeah, third grade. So it was always arguing with those two. Not with me, there was always their issues. Then I forgot what issue I had with Mikhail and Winnie the Pooh. I'll say Winnie the Pooh because I'm not saying Winnie, that's it. You know? And one time Mikhail, I think, messed with the wrong pair of students, honestly. He kept messing with them and stuff at the playground, during recess where the wood chips were at, where the monkey bars are at. And I don't know what they did to him. Feel like one of them reacted, obviously punched him. And he didn't want to go back into the classroom. Like he was just laying there, sitting there in the wood chips, and stuff. And then then he got on the slide and didn't want to come down the slide because he was pissed off what they did to him. This and that. He didn't want to go in until David was like, Miss Hollis, Makayo doesn't want to come in. We already told him he needs to come in. If recess is over, can you come get him? Because he doesn't want to listen. Obviously, he's not gonna listen to me and stuff. So yeah, that happened to him. And that was before the IEP. All this happened before the IEP. And during the IEP, they were insisting that I go to a different school. The school's name was Story Elementary, and the school I was at during sixth grade was Hidalgo in Fresno, California. I have lived all my life in Fresno, California, so any place I name is in Fresno, California, and stuff. So yeah, they were sending me to Story because they had assistants. They actually made me go see the school. I went. The school was okay, but I was like, there's a couple of months once we do all the process, all the paperwork. I'm only gonna be there like a month or a few weeks, I'm not gonna be there like for that long. So why do all that hassle, Because they didn't have assistants, and stuff. Because when I was using the manual wheelchair, they had to transfer me to the other wheelchair so I can go home on the bus, and stuff like that. So that was an issue. Then transferring and stuff like that, transfer and stuff. So they talked, Steve went to the therapy there, I mean, on the IEP, my therapist, and then he wanted to see the classroom, and Miss Hollis seemed to not really get along with Steve. She just gave him the keys and didn't really tell him, oh, Steve, I'll show you the class. No, she just gave him the key, like basically telling him, you go see the classroom. I'm not doing that, this and that. So I went with Steve, and showed him the classroom. I told him, this is the classroom. And he wanted to see if the table I had, like the desk was proper for me. And he said, no, you need a different desk, this and that. Then we talked about the restroom issues because he wanted to know, like, he was giving a suggestion because he was telling me about a friend he has that's in a wheelchair that when he always go camping, obviously there's nowhere to go, there's no restroom, and to use number one, he would have a urinal. So he was like, "You should just buy a urinal, bring it to school. Obviously, they'll keep it at the nurse's office, so whenever you need it, that'll make it easier." And then number two, obviously, we need to figure out who's gonna assist you, obviously. So, and there was enough talking until they decided, the principal, Mr. Drivers was going to keep doing because he went to the IEP. He told me that he was going to keep helping me out, this and that. So, yeah, so sixth grade was a hassle, but I can't complain really, you know, and stuff. And then I started using my electric wheelchair because we made a deal. We were like, okay, I'll bring my electric wheelchair, but the deal is I leave it here because I don't have, you know, space at home. That's why I don't use it because I don't have a vehicle to pick it up, this and that. And then at the end of the year, obviously I take my wheelchair home and this and that. They were like, fine, that's a deal. So we made a deal like that. So yeah, it was a hassle. Steve was a great therapist. I mean, he wasn't my therapist when I was in middle school. When I Before I started high school, they switched therapists, but I didn't get to see Steve, during those years. So he can see, like, that I did follow the rules, some of the rules, honestly, and stuff, but he was very helpful and stuff. My parents at one point decided to make another room behind our house. My friend Victor always he called it a man cave. He still calls it a man cave, even if I don't live in that house anymore. Yeah, let's say it was a man cave and stuff. And my parents made it so it was accessible for me. They made a ramp outside. But the only issue was my dad decided to put a tub, even though my mom told him, like, why are you gonna put a tub? It's gonna make it harder for us. But he didn't really listen in that. She would always tell him, ask Steve because we know he was a good therapist, obviously get his advice and stuff. Which at first he didn't want to, and at the end of the day, we did get advice. We told him, can he come to our house, and check the place and see like any recommendations, what he suggested. He was like, everything looked great. He's like, you guys did your homework, you guys did great, he has enough space, but the only issue is the tub, I would suggest you guys can take it out and turn into a shower, which we did turn into a shower, but it was more waste of money. That was his advice, but everything else is like, I wish I had one of these places myself, and stuff. So I thought it was funny. So yeah, I graduated sixth grade with my friend Lupita and stuff like that. But at some point, I'm gonna switch gears again, this time talk about the transition using a wheelchair and stuff. Was it hard? Was it easy? The doctors always told me that someday I was gonna stop walking, sadly, around 11 or 12. So around 11 and a half, because I was almost 12. Well, I remember this day like it was yesterday. I was laying in bed. It was obviously the weekend. I always want to watch TV. I tried to get up and I couldn't. I didn't feel like I had strength in my legs. So I told my mom, I called her like, can you help me get up? And I was like, it's time because she already knew that at any moment this was gonna happen. So we were already prepared mentally, but yeah, we didn't expect it to come around 11 years and 12 years and a half. My neurologist before this happened, they prescribed me some steroids. It's not the when they told me steroids, I always thought like steroids were the injection one, the needle ones that athletes use, but it's a whole different steroids or it's liquid steroid. They gave it to me for a while to see if I would. That steroid was supposed to help me walk longer, but it didn't really do anything. It just made me gain weight and stuff, so it wasn't working. So we stopped it. So like I told my mom, it's time. And she already knew like what I was talking about. It's time. So she brought my power wheelchair, helped me transfer. And yeah, it was a hard transition because getting used to my mom helping me, with my care 24/7, get me in the shower, you know, take me to use the restroom, change me, put my shirt on, you know, my shorts, my pants, my underwear, everything, and stuff like that. So it was putting my shoes in this, and there was a hard transition for me. Like I had a lot of things going on through my mind. Obviously, I always like when I was a kid, I always obviously like I talked a little bit about my childhood. I always, during Easter, obviously I went Easter egg hunting in that year. I wasn't able to do it because I'm in a wheelchair, how am I gonna stretch for to get an egg? So it was a hard transition. For me, a lot of the things that were going through my mind was like, what am I gonna tell my family, because they don't really know that diagnosis, when they see me using a wheelchair, they were gonna ask questions, that like I said, I don't know what was the proper answer during that time period. So yeah, it was kind of a journey then. You know how when have a disability, you know how people stare, especially if you use a wheelchair in public. That was another transition that was a little bit hard for me because I wasn't used to it. Now I'm used to it. I never had an issue with kids staring, but young adults, older adults, stuff like older kids. It's always an issue. For me, it was hard to get used to it, but it took time, but um, I got used, I got used to it quick. My advice is for those parents that are going through this stage right now, or that they're going through this stage, I would suggest give your son time to get used to it. It's a transition, but what really helped me is like which makes it easier, the transition from walking to wheelchair is like accepting the reality. If you accept it as soon as possible, which it can be hard, you know, if you accept it quick, then transition is a lot easier, in my advice, honestly. And then, like I said, I graduated sixth grade, and during summer, I broke my foot. Yes, I broke my foot. What happened was like my cousin Omar and Lisbeth were horsing around. I was sitting on the end of the bed, my cousin Omar's bed, watching TV, and somehow my Omar swung Lisbeth towards me by accident, and obviously she crashed into me, and I ended up falling, and I fell, and I heard a pop. I was still walking a little bit, you know, and so that was before I started using the wheelchair full time. So, yeah, so I broke it. I didn't have to use a cast, obviously, no cast. But what I did have to use, it was something else that they put in my foot for a few weeks. And during that time, my neighbor was a truck driver. So he would always drive a truck like to different states and stuff. Like, I think first he drove a truck, different states, like the delivery trucks, that go to the store and bring the product, whatever it is. So he did that. He would always bring the truck, with him at home, have it at home and stuff. And he asked if I would like to go get on the truck, and see the inside of the truck. And of course, I was down to do it. But during that time, messed up I broke my foot, like I was saying. So that never happened. Plus, once I got better, it was like, it was hard for me to get on there. The Hoyer lift wouldn't reach the top of the truck, so it wouldn't work. So sadly, I didn't get to get on the inside of the truck. So yeah, so I spent my summer getting better. It was a few weeks that I was wearing, I forgot what it's called, like it wasn't a cast or anything, but I forgot what it was. So I spent the summer getting better and stuff like that. And sadly, like I said, I did not get to ride on the truck. So this has been part one of my life story, living with muscular dystrophy Duchenne. Uh, Part one, like I said, the very beginning. Hope you guys liked. Hope you guys found my story interesting and you liked it. So stay tuned for part two. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification button, and don't forget. And before I end this video, life is short, so don't let muscular dystrophy affect you in any way or any disability. Anyone watching this video who has a disability, dealing with mental health, or whatever you're dealing with, life is too short. So always try to enjoy it, no matter, we all have struggles and stuff. Some it's a lot of struggles, and we have less struggles, but we all have struggles. But life is short, try to enjoy it however you can, be grateful for the positive things you have. And so don't let your disability define you, find your hobbies, find your interests, and just enjoy life. And until next time.